The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, Children's Health Defense. It's great to be here, and I am really privileged to be with an extraordinary panel today to talk about the health of the earth, to talk about all of the things related to that. And so I want to introduce Charles Eisenstein, Dane Wigington, James Corbett, Patrick Wood, and Meryl Nass, all of whom I believe have been on CHD TV at one time or another, in one capacity or another. These are all people who've been outspoken about freedom, about the environment, and about health. And I believe we can have a very constructive dialogue about all of these issues. So I want to start with the extreme weather that is occurring right now, not only in the United States, but perhaps worldwide. And I thought we could start with a very short clip that Dane Wigington, who often appears on Sundays talking about geoengineering, has prepared. And so, Lou, if we could see this short clip about what may be going on, and we can then discuss it.
Storms, snow and ice now span 1,300 miles as power outages mount and roads close. That's from CNN News. From Fox Weather, crippling ice threatens millions in historic winter storm path with major power outages and travel issues. Now consider this former headline from ABC. Artificial snowstorm brings chaos to Beijing. So, the Chinese can routinely engineer winter weather mayhem and the USA can't? Really? If you think chemical ice nucleation isn't a thing, think again. Chemical ice nucleation is one of the biggest weapons in the climate engineering arsenal. It is imperative for this fact to be understood and acknowledged by anyone that is truly trying to expose and halt the climate engineering operations. What is chemical ice nucleation and how is it used for climate engineering? Energy-absorbing elements create an endothermic or energy-absorbing reaction, as this lab demonstration clearly shows. Such materials have an absolutely profound effect on precipitation behavior and can convert what should have been liquid precipitation into frozen precipitation. Endothermic materials are specifically named in climate engineering patents. The weather modification patent shown is expressly for a chemical ice nucleation process. This patent was filed over a half-century ago. For how many decades have we been exposed to completely engineered weather that official sources are still trying to convince the population is only natural?
So I don't think any of us think that geoengineering or manipulation of the weather and climate is the only thing going on, but it certainly seems to be one of them. Dane, would you like to speak to that clip briefly?
Most people don't really comprehend that these types of processes are hard science. They accept that you can have an exothermic reaction, for example, from a very small size, you can create a massive energy releasing explosion, but they don't picture the reverse of that. And that's exactly what endothermic reacting elements are. Like the first aid kit that can sit on a shelf at room temperature for 20 or 30 years, you mix the cold pack together, you have ice instantly. What we're seeing is that being done on a scale that would rival a climate engineering Manhattan project, Mary. These are patented processes. Chinese government openly announced they were conducting operations like this, and all mainstream media covered it, but you bring it up here, suddenly you're marginalized.
James, I know you've reported on geoengineering and how it's finally coming into the mainstream news sphere. Tell us what you perceive about this dimension.
The propaganda surrounding this is a thing to behold, because the one thing that I've noticed with regards to the reporting on this exact type of weather manipulation is that every single time it is ever reported on, it is reported on as if this is some brand new breaking news development that just happened yesterday, despite the fact that we, of course, have had various versions of cloud seeding and other weather manipulation technologies going back many, many decades now. But they will always bring it up as if it's some sort of cutting edge technique that they're thinking about maybe deploying. Whereas in reality, as we know, it's been going on for some time. And in fact, we do know that Enron, yes, Enron was behind the development of weather derivatives markets a few decades ago now, back in the early 2000s. So we know that this has been part of a much, much larger plan for a very long time. But for some reason, we don't get to hear about this aspect of it in the daily news unless it is reported as a potential for the future.
Right. So geoengineering, solar radiation management, there's a lot of different words for it. Does anybody here does anybody think that this is not happening? I think probably we all agree that this is happening on a very large scale, but one that, as James just pointed out, has basically been obscured by the press and even the scientific community.
It would
Yeah.
seem that way. It would seem that way. We're told to not believe our eyes, for one, and that's led to all kinds of dislocation. It's almost like when masks were introduced to the public nationwide. Everybody just was expected, well, we know why we're doing this and follow the science or whatever, and everybody put on a mask and nobody questioned it. It's just crazy.
Right. Right. You're right. It's like people see the skies look profoundly different than they did decades ago, but it's somehow been normalized. And well, it's just condensation, right? If you talk about it being spraying intentional with heavy metal particles, you're kind of tinfoil hat. I think that's been used a lot, although that seems to be shifting a little bit.
Those are excellent images, by the way, that Lou's playing. Thank you, Lou. And I would think we would all agree, and our position at geoengineeringwatch.org is that whatever a person's position is on the climate or the state of the climate, how can we have any legitimate discussion about the climate from any perspective without first and foremost addressing the geoengineering issue? So again, when you can cover the entire horizon with what these jets are emitting, that is a complete skewing of any natural weather, anything. And so again, we hope that that will build bridges instead of burning them. That no matter what a person's position is in the climate, how can we discuss it with any legitimacy without discussing this elephant in the equation first and foremost?
Does anybody disagree with that or want to agree with that? That this has to be brought up as a major part of the conversation about climate, about environment.
Go ahead, Meryl. You go first. I'll go after you.
So spraying things in the air is only one part of this. I mean, we are not sure what is being sprayed, why it's being sprayed, who's spraying it. We have some very good theories about how electromagnetic fields might interact with charged particles that are being sprayed at the upper troposphere, stratosphere. And there may be other weather effects that have nothing to do with spraying, such as the formation of earthquakes, or it may have to do with spraying to keep a hurricane located in one place for a prolonged period of time. The thing is, it's not just happening in the United States, it's happening all over the Western world. It's happening in Russia. I'm told it's happening in Asia. And when you look at government budgets or you look at other official documents, what you see is that governments admit to doing research on weather, but they do not admit to actually trying to change the weather. Let me also say that we know that you could cause rain. You could seed clouds to cause rain, at least starting in the 1940s. And I was able to, when I was looking for solid evidence on geoengineering, I was able to find scientific papers up until the 1970s about how fog could be caused and certain other weather effects. But after that, there was nothing that I could find. And I assume this area went black. There was also discussions at the United Nations about weather and environmental modification, and I believe that was in the 1970s. But there were loopholes in the treaty that, again, would allow for peaceful purposes, which we all know is a very big loophole. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't have a handle on what's going on, but it is happening at a supranational level, just as COVID was. handled the same in multiple countries, and presumably it is being managed by the same people who managed COVID at a supranational level. And it behooves us to immediately talk about this and demand of our governments that we sort out what the heck is going on, because we appear to be getting sprayed with toxic particles that are likely to be harmful to our health, certainly not helpful. And we do have laws to prevent this. We do have a Clean Air Act and a Clean Water Act and other laws that wouldn't allow random people to spray toxic products on us. And yet, nothing's been done, and maybe we need some lawsuits. I'm not sure what we need. Maybe Mary is better at talking about that, but we certainly need to identify what the heck is going on and who's doing it and why.
Thanks, Meryl. I think that's spot on. And I'm glad that you're drawing the parallel to COVID, because for sure, this is supranational, much like COVID was. And we're all essentially in the dark about why this is going on, who's doing it, what it costs, what money of ours is being used for this. Charles, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, in fact, I think I'll also relate it to COVID, but I'll start by saying that I haven't done as deep a dive as some of the other people here into the geoengineering topic, although I'm somewhat familiar with it and familiar with different narratives about it. Is it a deliberate, massive program to alter weather and weaponize weather? Is it more of a inadvertent byproduct of additives to jet fuel? And there's all these different narratives around it. But one thing I know for sure is that the impulse or compulsion to attempt to modify the weather is completely natural to the mindset of science as it has developed over centuries, where the holy grail is to develop perfect control over nature and perfect control over the body. This was going to usher in paradise if only we could manage every molecule, whether in the outside world or in the bodies. Then we would have perfect health, a perfect environment, perfect control. And this mindset is natural when you seek to conquer nature, to domesticate the wild, to dominate human over nature. And when you don't see nature and Earth and all life on Earth and Earth itself as a living being, rather than an engineering object. Right. When you see it as an engineering object, you're going to engineer it. Yeah. Whether your motives are nefarious or benignant, the attempt will still be made. And this is, one thing that I think really complicates our ability to understand what happened in COVID as well. With the genetic engineering technologies, the mRNA vaccines and so forth, and this idea promulgated by our friend Bill Gates and many others that you're going to need your software upgrade, your booster every 3 months or every 6 months or whatever, and this is going to be a lifelong thing. And this is an improvement because we are imposing control onto a new realm that we had not had under control before. So this mindset is bringing perverse outcomes, and any positive benefits are diminishing. And we are awakening now to the deficiencies of that way of relating to the world and beginning to understand both nature, the earth, and also our own bodies as complex living systems with an innate intelligence that does not benefit from our clumsy, linear attempts to manipulate it, but that instead demands that we approach it in an attitude of respect, of listening, and a willingness to participate in a process larger than ourselves. So this is, my work on climate is fundamentally starting with a living Earth paradigm, rather than a carbon accountancy paradigm. But anyway, so all this kind of fits together in a mindset.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, Charles. And I think this idea about mindset makes me think about you, Patrick, and sort of the technocratic mindset, right? Do you want to speak to that, sort of a technocratic perspective on the earth, which, as Charles said, many of us see as a living being unto itself?
Absolutely. There was well, most of us are familiar with Agenda 21. It was started in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro. That was the first Earth Summit, as they called it, sponsored by the UN, of course. And there were some original environmentalists who attended that meeting. Actually, most of them were. And some of them saw through what was going on with the negotiations about development, especially taking place in the convention. Two of them, I count them as original environmentalists. They would be the ones today that have the long ponytails, probably, but they got bounced out of the movement, basically, in my opinion. And two of them wrote a book called The Earth Brokers. Their names were Finger and Chatterley, I think it was. And they were not conservative by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think they're not necessarily liberal either, but they were environmentalists. And this is how they summed up Agenda 21. And I posit that Agenda 21 basically was an expression of technocracy. That's a long story, but I'll just say that up front. This is what they said in their book, The Earth Brokers. They said, we argue that UNCED, that's what the convention was called, the UN Council or Conference on Economic Development, has boasted precisely the type of industrial development that is destructive for the environment, the planet, and its inhabitants. We see how, as a result of UNCED, the rich will get richer, the poor poorer, while more and more of the planet is destroyed in the process. That was their assessment. I happen to agree with this.
Yeah, yeah.
Ever since then, we've seen just this: the rich get richer. And I don't attack rich people. I wish I was one, but I don't have. That's not my issue here. The environment has been destroyed little by little by these people who were preaching some type of development, basically as resource management. They wanted to get everything under control, like you said, Charles said, and we're now at the point where this machine, if you will, has sunk its teeth into all the world and all of humanity. We see this in our government, I think in Washington, D.C. right now, but we're talking about the environment here in particular. They've done everything they've done along the way has had a negative effect on our planet.
Right. And so I think you touch on, Patrick, that really since this Rio convention and meeting at the UN, the environment has actually gotten much worse, profoundly worse. And Dane, you often talk about the collapse of the bees, the collapse of the birds, of the insects, of the plankton. The environment itself is in a very dire place. And I don't think any of us believe that geoengineering is by any means the only influence on that. But speak, if you would, Dane, to the really critical time that we're in terms of the health of the planet and the environment.
If I get back into this equation, because I want to advance the conversation, because many of the questions that have been asked as something we don't know, we do know. We do, because we've done testing at geoengineeringwatch.org. So starting with the jet fuel narrative, no, this is not a jet fuel equation, jet exhaust equation. That's a regurgitated official denial. This is a sprayed payload dispersion. We know that from testing that cost us at geoengineeringwatch.org over 6 figures to take a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration lab to altitude, top scientists in it. We also took a private jet testing platform to altitude, sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting, and we quantified with lab tests with the University of Minnesota, some 500, extrapolating how much materials in the rain, projecting that globally. They're dispersing somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons. That is not a jet exhaust issue. So we know the answers to these questions. Meryl asked the why, or we would question that. We know many of the whys, the storm that's going on right now in the United States, which, by the way, the area it's covering, this giant megastorm, this snowpocalypse, Ice-mageddon, every sensationalized name they give to it. This is not a natural event. You don't get snowstorms generated with moisture out of the record warm Gulf of Mexico or the record warm Gulf of California that suddenly dropped temperatures 50 degrees. This is chemical ice nucleation. And that massive area that's talked about like the whole world is cold, cold, cold. I'm not sure if any of you know how much surface area the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48 is of global surface area. It's less than 1%. Less than 1%, and that is hardly a snapshot of the world. In regard to the treaties that I believe Meryl brought up, the INMOD treaties, 1976, that's because Project Popeye in Vietnam was so successful at controlling precipitation in that war that they passed these treaties, but there's loads of data since that point in time. We do have a very good idea who has to be behind these programs, and that's those who print the money, those who can print money from thin air for whatever they want. Pentagon's missing something like $31 trillion in the last 2 decades. This is black ops money. So again, the bottom line is when they can generate the kind of engineered chemical cool down that they're in the process of right now, that generates headlines like President Trump saying, "Where's your global warming now?" Mr. Trump, the area where this completely engineered Gulf of Mexico moisture generated snowstorm is about 0.8% of the world's surface area. What do we see around the rest of the globe, with the exceptions of places in Russia, who also has a massive military that just engineered the same mess over Kamchatka? Our point is, again, that from an environmental standpoint, and I'm an environmentalist to the core, but must we not deal with the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first, regardless of any other agendas, objectives, causes, concerns? If we're being sprayed like lab rats, that's decimating the planet's remaining life support systems, and we can't breathe without inhaling toxic nanoparticles from climate engineering operations, is that not a fight for life right here, right now?
Well, I think it is, Dane. I don't think anybody would say that it's not. I don't think that it's, I think as you've said, Dane, we've been poor stewards of the environment. I don't think that it's the only thing, but certainly, Meryl, you focus on food, right? We can see that there's a plan to move towards artificial foods, right? Towards patented foods. And so this dispersion of toxic materials over land and water certainly dovetails into this idea that we have to move towards total control, as Charles was saying, and controlled food production. But probably others have thoughts about this. Can we address this hole around the geoengineering, this supernatural spraying?
Well, if I can jump into what you said right before that, we're also dealing with the financialization of everything, the tokenization, and the desire by elites in many countries to create digital money. And the UN has been very clear about wanting a reset of the entire financial system globally. And we see the digital ID and digital money coming into England, into Europe, into the U.S. And other places. So part of the ability to control everything requires the ability to control land and nature, and so the tokenization, the identification of what's happening on every acre of land in the United States. That process started a couple of decades ago. Rosa Quar talked about it. And subsequently, we've seen with the national asset corporations and with federal programs that have been going on for more than 20 years, some attempts to provide money to farmers, but in return, gain very granular information about what is going on the land that the farmers own. And so you don't need that, governments don't really need that information if we have private property and private enterprise. But if they want to control everything, they want to know what's there. And they may want to collateralize it. They may want to monetize it in some way. And the same, if they can control what's being sprayed or what the climate is like, they can control how much that land is worth, who wins, who benefits, who loses. The fact that there could be actual markets prediction markets based on weather when weather can be changed by unknown entities. That's crazy. Why would anyone? It's like voting on sports events when you know all the sports events are fixed. You would never do that. What we have is knowledge or gathering information about every part of our lives and what we own by governments, and certainly knowledge of everything we do online, and knowledge about the weather and control of that, and this attempt to control food, to centralize control of food, who grows what, patented seeds, patented everything. It's all coming together. It looks like disparate, different effects from different places. But when you look at it as one thing, it's this closing in of a control grid. And the weather modification seems to be part of that. What I didn't mention before is that chemical weapons, way back in the 1960s, we started getting rid of chemical weapons. We had made, many, many, many tons, maybe millions of tons of chemical weapons, and they were thrown down mine shafts and, they were pumped deep into the earth in multiple places in the United States. And earthquakes started to appear in some of those places. And then in some areas, the chemical weapons actually had to be pumped out again and then disposed of elsewhere. And there were several ways of disposing. So we know from that governments do know how to create earthquakes if they want to. Now, today, it may be that you can control earthquakes or other weather events through electromagnetic fields, or more likely, as I said before, the presence of charged particles in the atmosphere combined with certain electromagnetic fields can cause a range of weather effects and maybe other effects, maybe even mood-altering effects. And the fact that the research on this has been hidden from us for 50 years is critically important. And do we want to allow our governments and their secret military projects to remain in the dark, for these projects to remain black when they are affecting us? I think I don't sound as if it's as dire as Dane does, but I feel that it is. I don't know how much time we have. Governments or whoever is running these programs has been doing it for well over 50 years. We don't know how advanced their discoveries are and what they're able to do. And are we just going to sit here and allow this to continue?
Right. So you make the point, Meryl. I think we're all making the point. This is part of a bigger almost ideology, and it's about the control grid. It's about total control. It's about tokenization. It's about and probably I think many of us would believe it's also probably about depopulation, controlling the food supply. But I don't think any of us think that this is benign. One of the things I learned on Patrick Wood's Omnivore that's on CHD-TV is that it's this very small fraction of what's being done in science that we actually have open access to. The sort of black books of science around military applications is pretty vast. And so I think Dane probably knows the most about the patents that do exist in the open literature on this weather modification, weather warfare technology, but there's probably an awful lot that we really don't know as well.
Does anyone on this call think that this current ice and snowmageddon is a natural event? Anyone?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen, it's not even finished yet. So I want to see the patterns and the maps and all of that. But certainly it doesn't seem, it's certainly very atypical.
I would say I don't need to know, because whether or not, and I'm not, saying that weather modification is not happening. What I'm saying is whether or not it is happening, the more that we degrade the organs of the living being called Earth, called Gaia, the less able it is to maintain homeostasis and the less able it is to regulate its physiology.
Isn't
So
that
when
inseparable, though, from what, I mean, wouldn't this necessarily be a part of that response, though, Charles? Or maybe I'm missing something, but if you don't need to.
Well, I haven't finished yet, so
Okay.
You're definitely missing something.
Forgive me.
Yeah, so the organs of this living being are things like rainforests, whales, fish. Whales and fish are responsible for 50% of layer mixing in the ocean, and for nutrient transport, megafauna, birds, and everything that we're doing to destroy forests, the mining sector, the drilling, the timbering, the conversion of forests to agriculture, the draining of wetlands, the scraping of fish from the oceans, all of that, it would be like killing off 2/3 of the cells in each of your organs. Your body becomes deranged. The temperature, you might become unable to control the temperature. You might be able to, you no longer can control bodily processes. So this is what is happening on Earth. It doesn't depend on temperatures rising. It is a function of the inability of Earth to maintain its balanced physiology. So what I'm saying is, whether or not the geoengineering is happening, we could expect extreme weather events that seem unnatural. Now, the geoengineering probably makes things even worse. Just like if you have a degraded body and you start using pharmaceutical interventions to force the body into to raise levels of one hormone or lower another hormone, or to make it do something to close the calcium gates or whatever you're trying to do, it is going to make things worse and generate perverse consequences. This happened during COVID. With the I think that okay, maybe they were being malevolent, but I think that there was, at least among most of the vaccine developers, there was this kind of naive belief that we're going to fix this. We're going to, by controlling the body, which they see as kind of like a really complicated machine, we're going to make it better. And I think that weather modification is probably the same. There may be a small core of truly malevolent people, but most people involved in that, most scientists involved in it, they're not cackling, rubbing their hands in diabolical glee. They think that they're improving things. But the result is to exacerbate the derangement of Earth systems that is fundamentally caused by the destruction of its organs.
Mary, if I could, he said some very important things. If I could respond very quickly off what Charles said and what Meryl said. Meryl brought up disaster capitalists, and she's completely correct. Our system is full of disaster capitalists. They're like pirates on the deck of a ship that's sinking, filling their pockets with loot. How much good will that do them as the ship sinks? Charles, you brought up all the other factors that are destroying the planet's natural life support systems. I completely concur with you. Completely. I've done 6 major habitat restoration programs in the field. I ran them all working with state and federal agencies. My father was an arborist. I'm an environmentalist to the gills. But what I'm saying is, even as an environmentalist, I had to focus on the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat. What's the single most destructive human activity right now? And that would have to be climate engineering, because it's disabling those natural life support systems that you so accurately described. Again, I live in the middle of a wilderness area, off-grid, wind, hydro, solar. My home is on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. That's what brought me onto this issue. We have an environmentalist community pushing solar power while we have governments that are blocking the sun. It's blocking 50, 60, 70% of my solar power uptake. So my point is, and why I focus so much on this issue, if we have an issue that will soon render all other causes or concerns moot, must we not focus on that first? If our head's on fire, must we not ignore our stub toe and our skin knee? This one activity is not only destroying the planet's basic functional systems, ubiquitously contaminating virtually everything, destroying the ozone layer. And yes, it's deteriorating rapidly. It's not getting better, as we've been told. It's not the hairspray cans that are a primary cause, or CFCs. It's climate engineering. The frequency transmissions that Meryl brought up, she's correct. Regarding the earthquake scenarios, she's correct again, that the frequency transmissions can cause tectonic activity. We know that from the Fukushima quake, that MIT stated on the record, and any of your listeners can look this up, Mary, that they recorded extremely anomalous atmospheric heating directly above the epicenter for 3 days that they can't explain. All of this is intertwined, but if we have one aspect that involves all of these things, destruction of the planet's life support systems, ubiquitous contamination, frequency transmission, everything, must we not deal with this biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, or the boat goes down and nothing else matters?
Thanks, Dane. I think that pointing to this is one of the difficulties with looking at this, is that it's so opaque, right? And that's obviously been intentional. There's this narrative that this isn't even happening, although it obviously is happening. And interestingly, there's been a kind of a shift in that narrative, right? So I think this is significant. You and I have discussed this, Dane, that up until very recently, Bill Gates, but the UN, the World Economic Forum, all of the kind of big propaganda organs in our world have been saying, focus on climate change. It's all about climate in, investment, in building, in everything. And now that seems to be shifting, right? And they're saying, oh, it's not really about climate anymore. Now we've moved on. You don't have to worry about climate. And so I think part of the narrative is not as important as the reality. The reality is far more important, and you're focusing us on the reality, Dane, and I'm grateful for that. But let's talk about how the narrative interacts with the reality, because I think that does shape public opinion. It's a lot like COVID, right? The narrative was you're going to die tomorrow, and then people, acted on that, and they took what in fact were incredibly toxic injections. So I know, James, you focus a lot on the narrative. Maybe you could give us your thoughts about the narrative piece here about, it doesn't exist. And now, well, it did exist, but it's not really something we should be thinking about.
Yes, that is an extremely important part about how this propaganda functions. And I have so much to say about all of the things that have been said so far, including specifically what I guess we all come at it from our own perspectives. What I take to be the fundamental, underlying, unifying, energizing part of this whole conversation is what Charles is pointing to, which is the desacralization of nature. And I am not a Gaia worshiper. I am a Christian, so I believe that there was a created order of the universe. But at any rate, however you view that, we have seen the desacralization of nature that goes back to, I will say provocatively, the printing press, but that takes us into a whole different area of research and study. If people are interested in that, they can see my documentary on the media matrix. But anyways, from the development of the Enlightenment to the rise of scientism into the form of technocracy, which Patrick Wood is so admirably documented at Technocracy News and in his books, I think is the fundamental underlying issue that guides all of this, because it is the concept that we are essentially, in a way, digitizing nature, that we are the organic, the sloppy, organic, carbon-based life that is bootstrapping the silicon intelligence that is going to propagate the human idea into the future with this superhuman, transhuman, whatever. And part of that is manipulation of the climate. But as Meryl has pointed out, part of it is manipulation of the food supply, etc. It is all part and parcel of the same thing. But what you point to there, Mary, is exactly right. It is a propaganda phenomenon that I've documented before, which is essentially, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. Okay, it is happening, but it's a good thing it's happening. And that is exactly what we are being steered into with the geoengineering conversation, where it's not happening, it's not happening. Finally, they're starting to talk about, well, there are some universities that are thinking about, and some scientists have proposed the idea of, and eventually they will come out and say, okay, we've been doing it for however long, but it's a good thing. Because look at these extreme weather events and how, that's obviously because we have upset the weather gods by breathing out carbon dioxide. And the only way to take care of that is to engineer the climate. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the population will be primed for that exact propaganda argument because they have bought into the desacralization of nature and the technocratic mindset that's being foisted upon them. The real question, and the only question that really matters in all of this, because I don't think we fundamentally have deep disagreements about any of this, the real question is, what do we do about it? And that's the one we should probably be devoting our resources and time to thinking about.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, I want us to come to the point of what do we tell people? What do people want to do about this? People do want to preserve the planet, preserve life, preserve Gaia. So yes, happy to talk about what can we ask people to do about it? And Patrick, with your background in technocracy, tell us your thoughts about this.
Well, the technocratic mindset is legendary in my opinion. When they started in earnest at Columbia University in 1932, they had big egos for sure. They thought they could cure the Great Depression. They thought they could cure basically the ills of mankind by creating a resource-based economic system. They wanted to get rid of all politicians, and their attitude was, well, we have the science. We understand the science of things. There's nothing to discuss. So get rid of your political establishment. They even called on FDR at that point to declare himself dictator in order to just dismiss Congress. They wanted him to appoint technocrats top to bottom to run the country. Fortunately, FDR didn't do that. He probably could have, but I think he figured out it would have been gone wrong for him at some point when they figured out he's the last politician on earth and they'd wipe him out as well. But this was such an ego trip. They had in their mind to control everything in the universe. Nothing was off limits to them. They viewed people as just so many cattle in a feedlot. This is documented, by the way, in their technocracy study course. I've read it several times over the years, and I get something out of it every time. This is what caused Rosa Corey, who was a friend of mine, by the way, she passed a few years ago. This is why she, on every speech she gave, this is how she ended every speech. She said, talking about Agenda 21, which was technocracy warmed over from the 1930s, same thing. She said, every time, it's the blueprint, the comprehensive plan of action for the 21st century to inventory and control all land, all water, all plants, all minerals, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all energy, all law enforcement, all health care, all food, all education, all information, and all human beings in the world. That just nails it completely. That was the plan from the get-go. Total management of everything: the air, the land, the air, the water. What's left? The food, certainly. These are the elements that we have on Earth to survive. If you take any of them away, like the air, the water, we would die in just a few days. So, at this point, the big question I think we have to ask, given that, who has the chutzpah to do this to the whole world? Because it's not just the U.S. military, it's not just President Trump, for instance, or Biden, or anybody else, any other national politician. This is worldwide. Who has the chops to get or convince 72% of the world to take one or more shots? 72% of the world population. That includes pretty slim pickings of a population. Well, this is bigger just than us, and it's bigger than just Europe or China or Russia or whatever. There's some overarching group of people or technologies or whatever that are spreading their net around the world to capture the world, if you will. I would suggest that this technocratic mindset is spreading like a virus at this point. Maybe that's it. Maybe you have another explanation, but this has to be bigger than just the United States.
I don't think any of us disagree with that. And I think Dane, and Meryl have talked, this is supranational. Ultimately, it's the people who sort of control the financial system at a minimum. But I think part of what makes this hard, to Dane's point about what are we going to do about this, is we don't know who's doing it, which makes it it makes it hard for people in a certain way. Now, COVID, we can identify with certain particular people and certain corporations, but and perhaps there's ideas about the military industrial complex that's leading the way on the geoengineering, but part of that is that it's opaque. I guess certain states, Florida and Tennessee in particular, but Dane, I know you're talking to other states, are certainly trying to take actions, and I guess there's even been efforts in Congress towards a bill. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about efforts to address geoengineering and stop it at the state and federal level in the United States.
About 36 states with legislation in some processes. Let me back up, Mary, because maybe I've miscommunicated. I think we have a very good idea who is behind this. And the direction Patrick was going is in fact correct. It's certainly inarguably those who print money from thin air for whatever they want. It has always been the case. That's why they've tried to keep their stranglehold on the monetary system, on the dollars, the global reserve currency. They control media, government, military. They control it all. So again, I think we have a very good idea of those entities, the behind the stage entities that control it all. And that's where the focus needs to be. So bottom line is everything else is downstream from that. On the states that are passing legislation, it's symbolic, but still important because of that. We need to put this issue on the radar. In regard to how to stop it, our only chance, we would argue at geoengineeringwatch.org, is to reach a critical mass of awareness. And that involves waking up our military brothers and sisters, their families, defense contractor families, and individuals, so that they know they're literally participating in their own demise. They're not participating in some planet-saving endeavor. It's in fact omnicide. And we know, Charles mentioned that probably it's well-meaning scientists to produce COVID and this and that. And I would dispute that at the top. Certainly we have many people in the medical industrial complex that are so programmed that they accept safe and effective with concoctions that are anything but. But those that are behind all this know exactly what they're doing, I would argue. Exactly. That's why you have this intergovernmental cooperation on CV19 and climate engineering. And we're not guessing about that. We have congressional documents, one 800 pages long, posted at geoengineeringwatch.org from 1978, as far back as 78, expressly naming the intergovernmental cooperation between, quote, otherwise adversarial nations because of the cross-border ramifications. So we're right back to this core of power that Patrick mentioned, again, which I would agree with. It is those who print the money. And if we can wake up our military brothers and sisters, and I would hope they would remember their oath to protect their citizens from all threats, foreign and domestic, and stop participating in their own demise, because that's exactly what they're doing. And all of us can play a part in that. Every single individual listening right now can start a spot fire of awareness with credible data from a credible source. We try to be that source at geoengineeringwatch.org. We don't say it if we can't back it up. And if you start spot fires of awareness, ask others to do the same. Soon enough, Matrix Media, again, as Patrick described, would not be able to stomp this out. And we would have a bonfire that would cause a shockwave around the globe. We would put this on the radar. Our problems aren't over. And I'll end with this question can be for Patrick, Meryl, James, or Charles. Since we know right now, global insect population is down 80 to 90%. Plankton down 90% in the Atlantic. This is a peer-reviewed study. Global wildlife populations conservatively in the last 40 years down 75%. Global forests are now no longer carbon sinks, they're carbon sources. And tree cover from pre-civilization is down about 66%. We're getting UVC on the surface. That's indicative of an ozone layer that's near functional collapse. Would you consider our situation to be extremely grave and immediate? Any one of you can answer that.
Charles, I'm going to look to you.
Yes, the situation is extremely grave and immediate. I think we can all agree on that.
Thank you. And this is where back to, again, and obviously you care about the environment, Charles, and I fully concur, and I would live in a teepee and eat acorns if I could live on a healthy planet. Literally, I would. That's why I moved to the wilderness, and that's why I was planting trees with my habitat restoration until I knew there was no point. The rain is toxic. Literally, our rain is toxic. And yes, we have decomposing elements all over the planet. We fully acknowledge that at geoengineeringwatch.org. But Charles, I'm not sure you know this, but from our film, The Dimming, and the atmospheric testing platforms that we spent a great deal on, we found, and this was processed from Rensselaer Polytechnic University, that's 26 million views and counting in spite of social media censorship, that documentary. But we found particles being dispersed from heavy aircraft that were manufactured particles, including polymers. That's indicative of climate engineering elements. So if we know our rain is toxic, and it literally is, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, graphene, this is why we have foaming rain. This is why the snow is so incredibly slippery now, because it's got surfactants which are used to keep the particles from coagulating together. If that rain is so toxic, and it is, that it's killing soil microbiome, it's killing root systems, thus killing forests, the particles oxidate, destroying ozone layer, the frequency transmissions that Meryl brought up, also destroying the ozone layer. If we have this one element that's punched such a big hole in the bottom of the boat that if we don't seal that hole, boat goes down, nothing else matters. No other causes, no other concerns. That's why I'm focused on this issue. If we can seal that hole, a lot of other things we can focus on, but that's why we focus everything at geoengineeringwatch.org on this issue.
So Dane, you focused on people in the military and people in the defense contract world. Those are the people who are actually who are actually flying the planes and who are presumably manufacturing the polymers and the particles that are happening. Have you thought about what that strategy is? I know Meryl worked quite a bit with the military when they were being subjected to the anthrax shot. It's a pretty insular community, but we have a military chapter. We're working with them on a film right now about what happened to people in the military during COVID. But give us your thoughts. I mean, you've obviously given a great deal of thought to this, and those are the people you believe who are actually enacting this. So what are your thoughts about how do we reach those communities?
Well, certainly the Corps could only be DOD. They're the only entity capable of orchestrating these operations. And if I could weave these two issues together, Mary, the CV-19 or any other pathogen that's engineered, we know we have polymer fibers and graphene in the rain. Our lab testing with UC Minnesota proved that. Those are listed in geoengineering patents, but they're also used militarily as biological carrier platforms to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. We know during one phase of COVID, there were 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of an airborne dispersion. We know the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera, we own the audio of him stating this in his own words, posted at Geoengineering Watch, that part of his job for the DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. And we know that Italian researchers found CV-19 attached to airborne particulates. We even have Trump in 2020 stating on the record that he thought COVID was attached to the dust in the air, something like that. Again, all these puzzle pieces connect completely. So it's not just weather warfare, it's also biological warfare. And in regard to, again, our military brothers and sisters, they're being compartmentalized, Mary. Was the pilot in Vietnam that sprayed Agent Orange on his comrades on the ground, was he told this will kill your comrade? No, he wasn't told that. Same is true now. We need people in the military to start thinking for themselves, to remember the oath they took. And again, I'm not stating if we can expose this that we're out of the woods. The power structure is incredibly desperate. As we expose it, will they disperse something much more lethal into the atmosphere, Mary, like Marburg or Ebola? So again, back to the immediate fight for life. This is the crown jewel weapon of the military-industrial complex, the weapon with which they can and are, just like they're doing right now in the U.S., they can bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they were under assault. And what they're doing now, Winter Storm Fern was so incredibly engineered and way beyond any former boundaries of what they've done. You guys all remember, right? James and Patrick and Meryl and Charles, you remember last year the blizzards in New Orleans and Florida and the Gulf Coast, right? You guys all remember that, right? Everybody?
Look, I don't remember that actually, but
Really?
right now we're having blizzards in Mississippi and Tennessee and Georgia. So these things, I used to live in Mississippi. We did get snow occasionally, but certainly not every year, and usually not a lot.
That's not New Orleans, though. That's not Florida. And what we weren't told at the same time last year, and the same thing's happening right now. Same day last year that it's blizzarding in New Orleans, never before recorded, Maryland, in history of New Orleans. On the same day, it was 33 degrees warmer at the North Pole. Did anyone talk about that? No. So again, we know this technology exists. Chinese government openly announced their engineering snowstorms on a massive scale. Why would we think it's not exactly the same here when we're testing the precipitation and we've found the exact climate engineering endothermic reacting elements in that frozen precipitation?
Okay, so everybody here on this Zoom does believe that there is climate engineering or weather engineering going on. Let me disabuse the audience. You cannot spread Marburg or Ebola through the air. These, they will not last. These are spread through body fluids. They are not respiratory pathogens. Do not worry about that.
How do you know that definitively, Meryl? How can you definitively say that?
Because this is my field.
I know, but how do you know what
I am an expert on anthrax, which can be spread through the air.
Could be something else.
I have read many military documents, and I bet
you know what they're engineering.
You don't know what you're talking about.
So you know what they're engineering behind the scenes for certain, and you know what their capabilities are for certain, and you know
you don't have to worry about Marburg and Ebola.
Dane, Meryl is an expert on biological weapons, and she's done a lot of work in this area, and so I think it's very relevant for her.
It is relevant, but
that you just proposed.
I agree. I'm only saying, how can Meryl know what the military may have developed, and maybe it's another pathogen? My point was, forget those two viruses. My point is they certainly have very lethal pathogens they can disperse. So I think getting caught up on those two viruses is a mistake.
And they have, all sorts of bombs, all sorts of chemical weapons. They certainly developed many biological weapons, but, and they have nuclear weapons and they have electromagnetic weapons. So yeah, all this stuff exists, but it's not being used on us. Yeah. So
how do you know that?
Let's focus on what is being used on us and what we can do about it.
Biological weapons aren't being used on us? How would you, on what basis would you say that? When we have 239 verified historical tests conducted as of 1977, verified by the Washington Post, no less than 239 open-air biological tests conducted on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians by the U.S. military. And even with environmental issues.
And that was in the 1950s and 1960s.
No, the report was from 1977, Meryl.
Testimony from the Army. And later there was Project Shad, shipboard tests on the military. And these things are illegal. And so most military officers would not be willing to order such things.
So you think it's nothing like that going on right now, Meryl? That's what you would say then. Is that correct?
That's
no biological testing.
Why do you keep putting words in my mouth?
Dane, yeah, let's take it down a notch if we could. I think we all agree that there are weapons of all kinds of warfare, including weather warfare, that are available to powers that be, and that there's not a lot of hesitation in using them in some kind of stealth ways. I don't think, Meryl is the first person to write about biological weapons being used in, I think it was then Rhodesia, is that right, Meryl? Yes. So I don't think any of us disagree that weapons are being used against the human population. And I think you've suggested that it's the people who print the money. I don't think anybody would really disagree with that, although we don't really know exactly who those people are and where they're located. I think you suggested, Dane, we should be reaching out to people in the military. I asked you, what is your methodology for doing that? I think if those are the key people that you want to have think more critically about what they're doing, and then you said basically the pilots in Vietnam were actually, using Agent Orange on their comrades. So I don't know that we've advanced. What are we asking people to do? To talk about this? I don't think Geoengineering Watch can be the only source. I think we need to be giving people a number of potential sources so that they can verify the information. Certainly the information is out there from a lot of sources, but how can we more effectively, you're saying that the legislation at this point is symbolic. I would like to hear a little bit more, like James, I'd love your thoughts as somebody who's really thought about the propaganda, the censorship. What would you suggest might be effective ways to raise awareness and to create change around this?
Mary, I'll give it to James, but Meryl, I just want to clarify because maybe I misunderstood. I thought I understood you to say that, yes, those experiments went on with the U.S. military back when, and they may be going on other countries now, but not here in the U.S.? Maybe I misunderstood you.
To my knowledge, they are not going on in the United States because there are now considerable penalties that could be imposed that did not exist at the time.
I would have to take issue with that. I mean, I would have to respectfully disagree with those in power giving a damn about any penalties because they're clearly above those penalties. So I would argue even from COVID, and we saw the amount of countries infected in 3 days, and without any repercussion for those that actually wield power. I don't know why they would care about the laws you mentioned, and that would be a barrier for them to do whatever the hell they want.
No, I mean, you're right. I do believe that COVID was a biological warfare agent that was deliberately released. So I'm not disagreeing. What I'm saying is, no, I don't think that all this weather warfare is spraying a lot of biological agents on us now because there isn't any evidence that that is occurring.
I just brought it up. Italian researchers identified CV19 attached to airborne particulates.
So COVID, and we certainly know that the mRNA experimental technology was forced on the military, and we're actually doing a film about that. So I don't think anybody's disputing that. But I want to come back to James. James, do you have thoughts about how to reach that population? What could be done to advance change in this area?
Yes, well, I would say that I'm struggling to understand what the point of this conversation is at this point. And I think that muddied conversation that we are having right now is actually part of the problem that we are seeking to address. Because if we can't even articulate amongst ourselves what the problem is and how to address it, how are we going to recruit others into doing so? And to my mind, the point, for example, that as Meryl, I think you said, and I don't think any of us would disagree, that yes, the money masters, the people manipulating the financial system, are ultimately responsible for all of this. Absolutely true. And if people want more on that, they can go to corbettreport.com/Federal Reserve and watch my entire documentary on the century of enslavement, the history of the Federal Reserve, and talk about the money masters, etc. However, having said that, it's technically true, but perhaps trivially true, because if you are the Attorney General tasked with prosecuting what is going on right now, okay, let's drag them into the courtroom. And now we need a list of names. And to my mind, if you go out half-cocked, as it were, to the general population saying, okay, guys, you know, this thing is going on, and the very first question they're going to ask is, who's doing it? And you say it's the people manipulating the money system, I don't think you're going to get very far with that argument. So we need to have a much more detailed list of here are the exact people we would want to bring into court under oath to testify about what they do or do not know. And until we have that, I don't think people are going to take this conversation seriously.
Robert Kennedy called me 9 months ago, and Robert, in what I felt was a condescending way, posed that same argument to me that I've been doing this 20 plus years, so how come I don't know the names and addresses of everybody involved with climate engineering? And my response back to Robert is respectfully, I certainly want to be respectful with Robert Kennedy. And who killed his father and his uncle? Does he have names and addresses? Are you serious?
Yes, he does, and he's talked about it on my program
before. He has names and addresses of all the people involved, and why isn't he talking about that? If he has names and addresses, and
he does, he's talked about it before. I've asked him the question, and he's talked about it on air. Are you saying that that's not true?
And he's in a lot better position to know that than I am. And again, for this conversation not to be relevant at whether or not they're geoengineering, and when Meryl, I thought, insinuated that, well, they did it back in the win to the U.S. in the 50s and 60s, but not now because the penalties are too great. Oh, except for COVID. Yeah, they might have done it on COVID. Was that not a direct contradiction? And why would they stop at COVID? That's my point. I mean, again, how do we hide from what they're spraying on us? And why in the world would we think they wouldn't spray whatever in the hell they want on us? Why would we think that?
I'll make a plug for Omnivore. Omnivore we gave 2 presentations last year. We had a world-class set of academics, all PhDs, talking about various things, one from England, one from Europe, one from Japan, one from Australia, and people top in their field. We talked about this concept of an omnivore that's being waged against humanity. And it's a multifaceted multifaceted war. Certainly climate engineering is part of that, but there's other aspects as well. The war on, well, the war on the air for sure. The war on water, that's another thing. The war on the earth, the war on food supply, the war against the brain, the human aspect of the brain. And we talked about all the aspects. We try to touch somewhat on each issue. They're all important at this point. We have an omnivore being launched at humanity from all of these different angles, any one of which can kill us. We have AI now. That's another vector, if you will. So the technocrat mind has taken a turn into each one of these areas. They're all important. Dane, you do great work in your field. You need to keep at that for sure. That won't resonate with some certain people who are just not in touch with it at all. But other people maybe will be concerned about the war on food. They should take it up. They should take the battle cry to talk about the food. Maybe you're in the psychological space, if you will. Maybe you're concerned with AI psychosis is killing people now around the country. Maybe that's your field. You should take, if you have that sensitivity, go for it. But our point of bringing up this concept of omnivore in the first place was to tell people, just show to people, we're fighting a war, an existential war for humanity itself. I'll just stop with that, basically. This is my point.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with everything you just said, Patrick. Omnivore is a perfect term. I completely agree with you, and I'll leave it with this. On top of that, we'll add one thing to, and again, I'm completely with you on everything you just stated in this perfect term. The drill baby drill and burn baby burn and loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute until nothing is left, exactly as Charles stated, and I agree with Charles on that too. That is a part of this war, and we have a population that doesn't want to face that fact either. So it's an all of the above equation, if you will. But I do agree with everything you just stated, Patrick.
So, and just to say, I was talking to Patrick before we started recording. The Omnivore, both the Omnivore presentations are at CHD TV, and I highly recommend them. They are extremely fascinating. They're beyond what certainly I knew before watching them. And I think it is exactly right, Patrick. We are in an omnivore. It's coming at us from all sides. It is a control grid. It is the technocratic mindset on the nth level. And so what Jane is focused on is one of the critical elements, but it's not the only one. But the mindset piece is so important that I think you're focused on, Patrick, and you, James, and Charles. I think to some extent everybody is, but is there a way to undo the mindset at this point? Obviously, it's been around for 100 years. Is there some way to open people's mind who imagine that it's possible to control everything? Charles, what do you think?
Yeah. I think we have to start by understanding that belief systems, ideologies are not mere intellectual constructs, but that they correspond to a state of consciousness, a state of being, an experience of life, a state of relationship, whether you're embedded in community or not, whether you're embedded in nature or not. I do not think that the concept of an omnivore or of a war at all is big enough to encompass the magnitude of the drama that is unfolding today on Earth. The people who seem to have the most power on Earth, those who control the central banks, for example, more often than not, they are actually puppets of the system that they appear to control. They only have power to the extent that they play the roles that are defined for them by the system. If they deviate from those roles more than a little bit, they are quickly discarded So the question, the puppet master, so to speak, of all of these puppets is not even, it's not some group of human beings or, reptilian aliens. The puppet master is the belief system. It's the ideology that has emerged through history, self-emerged, self-organized, and carried humanity to the point of today that now it is becoming more and more obvious that that ideology is bankrupt, and it is thrusting us into, I call it a space between stories, where all of the old certitudes are breaking down. So, but whether or not you believe that diabolical individuals are causing all the problem, or if you believe, as I do, that those diabolical and opportunistic individuals are puppets of bigger forces, either way, you have to ask, how are they able to exercise their power? It depends on the agreement of all of us. Why? So we have to ask then, why do we so naturally, we, not the people on this call, but just in general society, why do we so naturally accept narratives about, the big scary virus and science is going to come and save you? Why do we so naturally accept narratives about we're going to improve the world by controlling the weather? These are, it is, very closely related to technocracy and to what James was saying about this mindset. I would take it way before the printing press even. I would say it's even a whole phase of humanity. It's a whole phase of civilization where we entered a story of separation, a story of control, and played out all of the dramas that that story allows. And now we are reaching the limit of that. And so I think what we can do practically is to, and we're all doing it in different ways. Okay, I'm not saying that the militant, hard, fight injustice is wrong. The dedication of people like Dane is admirable. But the level I work on, and I think that this is important to seed into all of our discourse, is the fundamental change in narrative, and I would even call it mythology, and the consciousness that goes along with it. So part of the old story is the story of war. It's the story of, if bad things are happening, it's because bad people are doing them. Where's the enemy? It's the hunt for the pathogen. But if you take a larger view, you can even apply metaphorically terrain theory to the power elite. What are the conditions that allow them to even exercise their power? So I just, I won't go to too much more deeply into that, but I just do want to, really take seriously this question that has been brought up. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do about this when the propaganda, why does the propaganda work so well? Because on the face of it, it is absurd, all the COVID propaganda and the double masking, and the 6 feet away. I mean, it was a social hysteria. It was transparently ridiculous, but everybody fell into lockstep.
Yeah.
Even those who didn't really believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the madness of crowds. Thank you, Charles. Meryl, do you want to give us some thoughts, final thoughts?
There are a number of states that are suggesting legislation that would, in some way or another, try to ban geoengineering in their state. Now, Tennessee had a bill first, and it wasn't terribly effective. It's thought that the Florida bill may be more effective. I think we have to see how these bills pan out, whether they're enforceable. Because obviously a plane can fly over your state, it doesn't need to land there or start there, and you don't really have control of it. but there are efforts, and that's really important. The website Zero Geoengineering has a number of state bills listed that you can look at, and I would encourage people to call their state legislators and tell them to support bills that ban geoengineering in the state. And if they don't have such a bill, to look at the other models from other states and implement one. And if you can get a few friends together, that has a bigger impact on state legislators than just one person alone. Or you may want to look at these bills and figure out which is the best and use it as a model. But I think that brings attention to the issue, which is what Dane wants and what we all want. We need to identify what the issue, what are the details of this issue? What is it really comprised of? I don't think we have to say exactly what's being sprayed. We know something's being sprayed. I think at this point, there's also the question is, what is the relationship of the populace to its government? Sasha Latipova said something that really struck me as strange when I first heard it, until I realized she was right. And she said, all governments have wound up trying to kill their people. And I don't know if that's true of all, but it's certainly true of many, that over time, governments have come to kill their people. And do we want to have that kind of relationship with our government? Do we want our government to have that kind of power? What do we want out of government? We have a lot of unconstitutional things going on now. We have strange methods of governance. We need a new man. We've been dumbed down by our education system, by our bad food, by our bad medical system, and we need to make ourselves strong, figure out how to identify propaganda and not be influenced by it, and create new structures. I mean, it's really, really hard to make us think in a more clear and coherent fashion. But I think if we can do that, even a small percentage of the population can do that, it will be tremendously helpful.
Thanks, Meryl. Patrick?
I agree with Meryl totally. We're facing the battle for the mind. Your mind is your mind. And if it doesn't think right, if you can't think critically, if you can't figure out things for yourself, you're not going to be on board with anything we say. But more people are thinking critically today probably than in lots of years. I'll say that. I see people all the time starting to ask questions about just stuff. Maybe it's one thing, maybe another, but people are kind of waking up now after the stupor that we had during COVID. So there's some hope there that people will take responsibility for their own thinking processes, and they'll start to reject some of this stuff. If you're complicit along the way, there's no hope for you. There really isn't. You're just going to be driven by the wind. But if you think critically and put up a resistance, even in your own mind, that's where this whole thing has to start. Right. So from there, you are in a position to convince others or talk to others to get them on your wavelength, whatever, and you can have an impact, a positive impact on all the people around you. But it has to start with you. You have to do something today. Don't put it off. Don't say, well, I'm going to get engaged next month. I'm going to a city council meeting, whatever. Do it. Just do it now. Commit now to take action. And you might be surprised how much headway you can get. Even by yourself, you'll find people follow you if you're willing to lead. If you don't want to lead, find somebody to follow.
Thank you so much, Patrick. James?
As people may or may not know, I do a weekly Solutions Watch series where I try to concentrate on specific things that people can do to actually improve their lives and hopefully improve the world for the better. So my mantra is that I'm not going to poo-poo anybody's efforts. If they think that something is going to improve things, go out there and do it. So I would just like to reiterate that action-motivated mindset that I think will be the thing that, if anything, gets us through these times, will be that. Having said that, so I'm all on board with all of that. So if people think that calling their member of legislator or whoever is going to do things, great. If they think going to the town council and arguing is going to do something, if spreading information and to other people, great. I say yes, absolutely everything that you can think to do to get more information out there and to get people energized about these issues is to the good. Having said that, let me bring everything back. I think it goes back to what Charles was talking about there with regards to this. This does go beyond individuals who are individual and identifiable people who are part of a conspiracy that is participating in this. But it goes to the level of not even, I would say, even deeper than ideology. It's almost like a philosophical orientation to the world. And I think perhaps we all need to read or reread Martin Heidegger's Question Concerning Technology and about that fundamental orientation to the world that we have developed over the centuries or millennia, in which everything in the natural universe becomes standing reserve. Assets, resources to be ordered, stockpiled, and quantified, and then rationed out as need be for whatever purposes that we are using them for. And from that standpoint, even if we were to, for example, finally get the public to understand the truth about geoengineering, etc., they could, within that mindset, be argued back into, well, we need better kinds of geoengineering. We need, this technology can be used for evil, it can be used for bad. What we need to do is use it the right way and get the right people in charge of this system in order to use it responsibly, etc. And I think that is the sort of philosophical blind alley that we could very easily be led down by people who I think actually have come at this from a different perspective, which is that of eugenics. I think there are those who genuinely believe that they are superior and fit to rule over others, and that is what's behind the depopulation agenda. But perhaps that's another conversation for another day. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much. Dane?
I want to start with Charles. His perspectives are profoundly important, and I completely concur that this human mindset, this condition that goes back so very far, that is really even more core than those core individuals that are manipulating everything the way they have for such a very, very long time. And in regard to what Patrick stated about many trying to wake up, and I would agree with that, it's starting because they don't have a choice anymore. When the food shelves empty out, there's no more choice. The race we're fighting right now to the intersection is as people are trying to wake up, they're getting dumber by the day because we are all sucking up aluminum nanoparticles with every single breath we take. Meryl mentioned the states and the legislation, and it cannot be enforced, Meryl. We know that. It's not enforceable. These are DoD operations that are based under national security, but it does, as you stated, matter symbolically. We need to put this on the radar. If we can do that, the fur will fly, the shock wave will unfold. The problem we've have with the wedge that's been driven into society very successfully by those in power is they have the environmental left that recognizes all forms of damage to the planet except climate engineering, because they've been trained, taught, and told, and unfortunately they're right too many times, people who acknowledge climate engineering deny every other form of damage to the planet. And that's simply wrong. It's an all-the-above equation. So we need the environmental left to acknowledge this monumental piece in the equation, because how can you talk about climate anything from any perspective without acknowledging this first and foremost? And we need the other side of the fence that acknowledges climate engineering, but then denies all the other forms of damage with all these carbon fuel industry funded entities, Climate Depot, all these fronts for the carbon fuel industry, and they're paid indirectly through fronts that, so they can't track the money to, their job is to deny the damage to the planet. Everything's fine. Drill, baby, drill. Trump's statement, there's no global warming, while less than 1% of the planet's surface area is being chemically cooled, sensationalized headlines. And oh, by the way, if you want to get warm, go to the Arctic Circle. Nobody's talking about that. We need to fix that wedge. And again, I would argue the way we do that, build bridges, don't burn them. No legitimate discussion about climate anything without addressing this first and foremost. And if we can't breathe, I'll leave it with this. If we can't breathe without sucking up aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, graphene, and God knows what else, you have to know what you're looking for before you can find it in a lab test, no matter how important a lab you're working with. If we can't breathe without sucking this material up, that's an immediate fight for life that supersedes everything else. I'm simply trying to make that point. So I'm grateful to everybody that showed up for this exchange today, and let's keep swinging before the fence because we don't have much time.
Thanks, Dane. So I want to thank you all. I think this was a productive conversation. I think there's a lot of elements to it as we looked at it. It's not just the geoengineering. It's not just the environmental harms. It's also the mindset. It's the technocratic approach. It's the propaganda. It's the censorship. It's the ignorance, right? There's so much that we don't know. But I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to talk with all of you about this. And I hope that this will go far and wide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
God bless.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.